I am Ghazi Juma, the chairman of the board of the center. Esteemed panelists, dear colleagues of the board of management, Geneva Centre, and its staff members. Welcome to this international event organized by the center to commemorate this very important Human Rights Day, the 72nd. I am both pleased and honored to chair this panel, where we will be hearing and benefiting from the rich and varied experiences and achievement in the field of best practices in human rights. The aim, which is the theme of this year's Commemorate Day, is to recover better and ensure more just and equal and tolerant societies, which celebrate diversity and evolve in harmony and prosperity. I would like to stress that your valuable work at the grassroots level and in close and caring proximity with those in need is an indispensable pillar of the global human rights effort, complementary to those undertaken by national authorities and international organizations. I therefore look forward to hearing you. But before, allow me to provide you some food for thought for our discussion. I may recall in this context the Security Council Resolution 2532 of this year, adopted unanimously by Security Council in July of this year, calling upon all parties for the general and immediate cessation of hostilities and a humanitarian pause to enable the safe, unhindered, and sustained delivery of humanitarian assistance in accordance with the international law, including international humanitarian, refugee, and human rights law. This action to help unite efforts to fight COVID-19 in the most vulnerable countries, recognizing by this the negative impact of the pandemic on human rights. In this resolution, the Council also acknowledged the critical role that women play in COVID-19 response efforts and called for concrete actions to minimize the impact and to ensure the full, equal, and meaningful participation of women and youth in the development and implementation of an adequate and sustainable response to the pandemic. I may recall also the report of UN Secretary General Shared Responsibility, Global Solidarity Responding to the Socio-Economic Impact of COVID-19, published in March 2020, in which he stressed, I quote, "We are facing a global health crisis unlike any in the 75-year history of the United Nations, one that is spreading human suffering, infecting the global economy, and upending people's lives. But this is much more than a health crisis. It is a human crisis. The coronavirus disease is attacking societies in their core." End of quote. The Secretary General, in his report, further stressed in relation to protection of human rights and to COVID-19, I quote, "Protection of human rights and efforts to ensure inclusion are needed across the preparedness, response, and recovery spectrum. Age, gender, and migratory status are factors, among others, to be considered, while governments have to take difficult decisions in response to COVID-19, including the use of exceptional state powers in many settings. Leaders must take every measure to preserve civic and democratic space and help to build and preserve trust in institutions and to stem rising xenophobia, discriminatory racism, and stigmatization." End of quote. Without further ado and delay, and before giving the floor to the panel moderator, Dr. Umesh Alwankar, Executive Director of the Geneva Centre, who will briefly inform us of the conduct of this meeting, we are pleased to project a short video published by the Centre today on the occasion of the Human Rights Celebration Day. Thank you.
Thank you. I echo the chair as the executive director of the Geneva Centre and moderator of this panel in reiterating how honored we are to have you with us today. This is particularly so because your values and mission reflect closely those of the Geneva Centre. Founded in 2013, the Centre is an independent human rights think tank and advocacy institution. Its goal is to undertake research and analysis on vital human rights issues to offer ways forward and promote intercultural and interreligious dialogue to foster mutual understanding and acceptance in celebration of the diversity of humankind. The pandemic has highlighted the interconnectedness of today's world. In this, we at the Geneva Centre believe that reinforcement of human rights, solidarity, collective responsibility, and accountability are the pathways to recover better and sustainably and usher in egalitarian, just, inclusive, and resilient societies. Ladies and gentlemen, the panel will be conducted as follows. I will give the floor as moderator to each speaker in turn, introducing him or her very briefly, since you have the indications of their itinerary profile in the flyer that was sent, and requesting that they briefly speak about a subject I will propose in relation with their human rights activities. I would like to stress that the time allotted is strictly limited to 5 minutes, which alone would enable all 8 panelists to make their presentations equitably. I therefore earnestly request you to abide by this limit. At the end of the panel presentations, I will offer a short wrap-up. And if time permits, we could have a brief exchange on some of the questions raised. The chairman will then proceed to make concluding remarks and close the panel. With this, I call upon the first panelist, Mrs. Salwa Mansouri. Mrs. Mansouri is a second-year undergraduate student pursuing politics and international relations at the University College in London. In 2019, she founded Refugees, which is an enterprise, social enterprise that aims to economically empower refugee women and provide quality education for refugee children in refugee camps. Mrs. Salwa Mansouri, our question would be, how can we better address the stereotypes about vulnerable populations such as refugees? And also, could you tell us a bit about the groundwork undertaken by your organization? Thank you. Over to you.
Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you so much for this incredible opportunity, and thank you so much to the Center for having me here today. I'd like to start off by requesting everyone to just think of the first picture that comes into their mind when I say the word refugee. Often when I discuss this and when I say this, there are individuals who claim that the first image that sort of comes in their head is about refugee camps, people in tattered tents, people on the go, and people with children on their waists. And I don't blame you for having this picture in your mind, because this picture does come into my mind as well. And the reason for this is because of the way media and a lot of other news agencies have framed the entire concept of the refugee and migrant crisis. Because of the articles we see, because of the words we read, because of every single picture that we see around us, the refugee crisis has been framed in such a stereotypical way that it becomes very difficult for us to escape the stereotypical notion that we have. But if I tell you that instead of looking at refugees in tattered tents and helpless and vulnerable, I urge you to look at them from a fresh perspective of refugee women in refugee camps converting urban and plastic waste into sustainable educational materials. And from the daily wages, they're able to send their children to school. They're able to buy sanitary products for themselves, which is a symbol of female economic agency. They are able to take decisions for themselves and for their families. Single mothers are no longer seen as helpless individuals, but rather individuals who can keep the refugee community tight knit and in harmony. So essentially, the reason we don't see refugees in a positive light is because we're constantly surrounded by these stereotypical notions by the media and by articles that we read. So the best way we can address this situation is by allowing ourselves to encounter different news articles and different sources and really question ourselves, where is this image coming from? Why do we have a single-handed image of the refugee crisis? And what makes us believe refugees to be in a certain way? As opposed to answer your second question, Refer-UG started off as an organization that wanted to do more than just provide refugees with human rights. We wanted refugees to not only be at the receiving end of human rights, but provide human rights around us. By creating sustainable educational materials, refugee women are improving the educational infrastructure of schools in India, providing quality education to Indian children. In this very way, we highlight how human rights shouldn't be defined by who we are, where we've come from, but rather by what we can do and what we have the capacity to do, irrespective of gender, irrespective of race, irrespective of citizenship. So as I end, I would like to end by saying no one is too young to create change and no one is too young to protect human rights. We all have the ability to do that and we all should. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Salwa Mansouri, for these very thoughtful insights, new insights. On that, allow me to give the floor now to Mrs. Eli Padarwand. Mrs. Padarwand is a founder and CEO of the Women's World Summit Foundation, which is a non-profit organization based in Geneva since 1991 with UN consultative status. The foundation serves empowerment campaigns, in particular for the advancement of women's and children's rights. So, Mrs. Padarwand, I have a couple of subjects to propose to you shortly. Could you please tell us about your annual empowerment campaign, 17 Days of Activism for the Empowerment of Rural Women Leaders and Their Communities, and what was done in that for the recovery efforts? And secondly, some information on the prize for women's creativity in rural life that is awarded by the Women's World Summit Foundation and this year's awardees. Over to you, Mrs. Padarwand. I'm informed that Mrs. Padarwand, not having the connection, is going to reply by phone, so it might take a minute or so for the technical connection to be effective. Otherwise, I propose we move on to the next. The next speaker would be Dr. Adil Sajwani. Dr. Adil Sajwani is a family physician with the Ministry of Health and Prevention in the United Arab Emirates. His main focus of interests are health awareness, capabilities building programs, and e-learning. Dr. Sajwani, a couple of themes for this short intervention. How did the UAE manage the pandemic inequality in the healthcare sector, and how can it continue to be reversed? And secondly, could you shortly elaborate on the topic of women and gender inequality during the pandemic? Over to you, Doctor.
Thanks a lot. First of all, good morning, good afternoon for everybody. And I think the UAE experience regarding the inequality in the pandemic is one of the success story, actually. We have seen the pandemic is affecting most of the countries worldwide, While many of the countries have a very challenging healthcare system that rich people get better care and poor people, they don't. The United Arab Emirates decided in the pandemic, everybody gets free testing and free treatment. So we have more than 23 drive-through testing for COVID-19. All the primary care departments, it's more than 100 primary healthcare clinic around the countries. They have been doing the testing free of charge. If somebody is not eligible for the testing, the amount of payment is around 85 or 100 dirhams, which is a very less amount of money. Now the issue was the ventilators was free of charge. The staying at the hospital was also free. I understand that 1% of the world rich people, they have more than the 30% of the income worldwide, and this is a big challenge. I mean, in the UAE, people have suffered with the closure of their small and medium enterprises, the shops and their businesses. The United Arab Emirates decided to do a major ministry change. They have appointed a minister for the small and medium enterprises and the entrepreneurships. So we are trying to do the recovery from the COVID-19, which affected us very hardly and affected the world actually. In healthcare sector, I think we did a great job. We are a small country, but we have 4 healthcare systems in the country. We have federal government and we have 3 local governments. There was a bit of issues regarding changing their protocols for the testing and for the for what people and what group of people are eligible for free testing. But again, the treatment and it was free of charge. The major burden was though on the healthcare professionals, which had to work day and night to prevent COVID-19 as any other countries. The issue was on women. So we tried, the Ministry of Education tried to support all working healthcare women like doctors or nurses with a shadow teacher that can teach their children regarding distance learning and the distance learning phase. But again, this was a bit of challenge. Also regarding moving healthcare professionals between different emirates, because the licensing for practicing was different, was also a big challenge. So I think in the middle of the pandemic, the United Arab Emirates, they sent over 100, they send medical equipment and instrument to more than 120 countries worldwide. And that's in the middle of the pandemic where few countries were trying to steal equipment and masks from each other. So I think we have a soft power here in the United Arab Emirates, supporting other countries, supporting healthcare stuff. Again, COVID-19 is something new and we have a lot to do. How to reverse it, we try as a government to support SMEs, we try as a government to support healthcare stuff. But again, I think with the issues of and locals and non-locals, by the way, UAE citizens and expats, they all receive the same treatment either at hospital or at institutions. So I think for future, I think our main challenge will be reunifying the healthcare in the countries between different emirates. And some emirates, they still have healthcare insurance, while the federal government is still providing a free of charge health cards. So these mild things could be resolved with time, and we are trying our best to support poor people. I understand some expats went to their countries in the middle of the pandemic, and this is more respectful. But again, the United Arab Emirates, I think, did a great job and a great experience in supporting people in the middle of the pandemic.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sajwani, for this very, very innovative remarks about rather the innovative steps taken by the UAE in the free equipment being given and testing, as well as the helping out, which is an example of solidarity and sharing of experiences and of wealth between human beings and different countries of the world. Thank you very much indeed. I will now move on to the next speaker on my list, the next panelist, Mrs. Diana Madibekova. Mrs. Madibekova is a PhD researcher based in the UK. She researches the field of international business and peace, human rights, global governance, and regulatory frameworks, and the potential role of the private sector as an actor in international relations in general and human rights in particular. So, Mrs. Madibekova, if you could tell us briefly on your thoughts and experiences in two areas. One is, what are the small steps every individual can do for a better, fairer, and more equal world? And secondly, have the challenges facing the globe, changed? And if so, how will, in your perspective, they evolve in the next decade? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. It's a great joy to be here. And thank you for the wonderful introduction. So the title of my today's presentation is Business, Diplomacy, and Peace, Tremendous or Troublesome Trio. The unprecedented health and socio-economic crisis of this year led to discussions around revisiting old concepts and ways of thinking about administering society, organizations, and human relations are amongst the most passionately debated. And modern global affairs created new forms of diplomacy, whether that's corporate, digital, cultural, fashion, or even food. It has spanned across national borders and expanded beyond traditional ideas of conducting diplomatic relations. And it seems that it's no longer solely about high-profile relations between statesmen. It has also welcomed many new non-state actors onto its stage while crafting a more connected, diverse interaction. And yet that might also have created more tension and ambiguity. Researchers in North America and the Nordics, Oitzel and Miklean in 2017, have written that one of the challenges in starting to think about the role of business in promoting peace is that peace as a goal is difficult to define and measure. It's traditionally been viewed as a subject of political science, of peace and conflict studies, of international relations, but not of business and management studies. And it's a very new emerging field, according to another author, Katsos. And the result is that social scientists have generally focused more research on violence, conflict, and political risk, rather than on how to promote peace and stability. And what my research brings to the discussion is that instead of waiting until conflict arises, we need to promote and to discuss and evaluate what peace is and with its role within different contexts. And another author, Ford, claims that perhaps more noticeably outside of management studies, the debate is marked by tendency to generalize about business or private sector. And this can obscure the enormous diversity that exists between and within different industry sectors in terms of size, forms of incorporation and financing, ownership, sector and subsector. And of course, peace is also obviously a very elastic concept. It can mean so many different things to different audiences. And some authors say there is also a need to more clarify for this aspirational field of business and diplomacy. And the questions that they're asking is that what did or do corporate and financial representatives see as their peace building role? What reservations do they have about what is a very highly political and public sector activity? And how do they define peace and success to contributing it? And my research has led to discussing the very notion of peace within private sector in different audiences. And I bring an argument that peace is not always the absence of conflict. The need to disagree and dissent respectfully has never been so necessary as we can witness it this year. Furthermore, I argue that peace should be reconceptualized, or rather redefined, as a commitment to open dialogue and amicable resolution to misunderstandings, as well as avoidance of causing, whether that's intentional or unintentional harm or disturbance to others. Peace as such has to be embedded in the way we talk to each other and about one another. It's a vital characteristic of mature individuals and communities that derive their sense of self from understanding themselves and the complexity of human, I put in brackets, international relationships, and their proper management through coherent and consistent communication. And while fashioning agenda for the future, we shall remember that various circumstances throughout world history and the unprecedented challenges of the current crisis emphasize that creating, developing, and maintaining peaceful communities where individuals have a sense of trust and respect towards one another and opt for dialogue despite the scale and in the face of crisis cannot perhaps rely on a single entity. It's actually everybody's business. And summing up an answer for both of the questions, I think creating new and developing new narratives for our global community is a very needed and necessary task in which business, diplomacy, and peace can play a tremendous role. But there is an urgent need to craft a clarification on whether we are taking the definition of peace from political science into management studies or whether we are adapting it into the field that never really had peace on its agenda. And I think that if each and every one of us can have discussions and contributions and dialogue by expressing their opinions and thoughts and remarks, I think we can create a better world for all where we're seen for who we are and not just what we come to represent. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for these very insightful remarks about peace, business, and conflict, and how to go about improving the situation over the next coming years and decades. And it's not very easy indeed. Thank you very much. The next speaker on my list is Mrs. Almas Sheikh. Ms. Sheikh is a human rights lawyer and research associate at the Centre for Law and Policy Research in Bangalore, India. She is working on intersectionality of gender rights and representing gender and sexual minorities and their constitutional guarantees in India. Mrs. Sheikh, on this basis, again, to you, two perhaps topics for your reflections within the limits of time. Firstly, in view of COVID-19 recovery efforts, could you address the importance of developing and advancing strategies grounded in core human rights values, and how they could further the interests of the vulnerable communities such as women and girls, including those with disabilities and sexual minorities and transgender persons? Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Palwankar, for that question. Just so that I am clear, I just wanted to say what COVID-19 has meant to me as work in terms of a human rights lawyer. It is not exactly an unprecedented crisis because it is something that we have never seen before. It's true, we have never seen this before, but it's an unprecedented crisis in the way it has amplified the existing inequities that are present in the society currently. If there are different classes, it has amplified those classes in terms of who can stay in and work from home and who can go out and have to put their lives in danger. In terms of persons with disabilities, how they have been completely left in the lurch. In terms of gender and sexual minorities, who have sort of faced the brunt of the stigma and the discrimination that is there during this crisis. So without further ado, I would like to straight away go into the report that we created as part of the Center for Law and Policy Research called the Exclusion Amplified, Trans Community and COVID-19 in India. And this report is necessary because although it is about the trans community, it showcases a general trend in terms of the difficulties that were faced in India during COVID-19 and what were the recovery efforts that were taken in place. So during COVID-19, the trans community is usually seen as somebody who's doing sex work and begging. And in a society which has completely stopped any sort of social contact, and actually enforcing social distancing, it is necessary for us to see that this affected the livelihood of the people who were there in the trans community, who were completely dependent on this level of income. And with the loss of livelihood and the income, it had a cumulative effect on other aspects, such as their ability to buy food, their right to food security, their right to housing and shelter. If you cannot make money and pay for your house, where do you stay? Are you out on the streets? If you do not have the money, if you do not have the ability to pay for your medical treatments, a lot of the trans community goes into, they need hormone replacement therapy, they need medication for HIV, they need medication for mental health, because they're forced to go back and stay with their parents and have to essentially go back into the closet and deny their actual being. When these were all the cumulative effects, because they could not live, they lost their income. And these were the crises that we saw as part of our work and as part of our research. So to come into the first question in terms of what are the recovery effects, it is necessary to know that there are policies in place. There is a policy in terms of food security, in terms of public distribution system of food, in terms of public distribution of healthcare. There is accessible healthcare that is available. There is shelter and rehabilitation centers that are provided. However, the difficulty was in terms of implementing these policies and laws which were in place. And that is where I feel we can, to come to the theme that is of this talk, what is how to recover better, is to strengthen strengthen the centers or the structures in place, strengthen the public distribution system so that everybody has something to fall back on in case they're not able to survive. They have something, they have the state sort of providing for them in these times of difficulty. Apart from that, I'm really glad that I'm going after Dr. Madibekova, because she brought up a very important point, which is also being implemented in India in terms of the implementation of human rights, not just by the state, but also by private actors. And by private actors, I do not mean just businesses, but also us as individuals. Since there is a lot of stigma, discrimination, violence that is there, and biases, whether known or unknown within ourselves, it is necessary to understand those. And it is also necessary for the state to make us responsible for the words and the actions that we take, which is why one of the important issues that we did take forward was the discrimination that we faced and fighting against these. One way we did this, and one way we have been trying to look into the intersectional aspects, that is, if I'm a person who is from a sexual minority, who is a person with disability, and who is from a religious minority background, we need to look into these intersectional identities so that we can understand the integrated discrimination that comes into play and through which we can sort of protect them. And as a lawyer, maybe it's because I'm a lawyer, one way that I have noticed that it works is by approaching your judiciary that is available to you. Whether it is local courts, whether it is the High Court, whether it is the Supreme Court, they have done an immense and tremendous amount of work in terms of enforcing the already existing laws in India to ensure that it is taken to its fruitful end. That is the realization of the rights in day-to-day basis, and not just as an ideal cloud of human rights that we see every day. With that, I feel if we can strengthen all of these institutions, that is the judiciary and the executive, and strengthen the organizations and the structures in place, we will definitely be able to recover better, not just in terms of another pandemic, which I hope not, but in terms of any situation, whether it is a pandemic or whether it is not. And hopefully that helps. Thank you so much for giving me the platform.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Alma-Sheikh, for this very comprehensive and clear, but at the same time succinct presentation. I have now the pleasure of giving the floor to Mr. Joseph Aguina. Mr. Joseph Aguina is one of the founders of Olkejuada Adult and Continuing Education Association in Kenya. He's a human rights activist with decades of experience in issues, very fundamental human rights issues, such as alleviating poverty, eliminating illiteracy, standing up against child marriage, and promoting the very fundamental right to health. Mr. Aguina, I would have maybe two topics to suggest to you for your brief presentation. One is, how has COVID-19 affected the economic situation of the Maasai community, since we gather that you have been working with a particular focus on that community? How is your organization addressing it? That's the first topic. And the second is, in relation to your focus areas, how have the school closures affected the rights of the girls, particularly in regard to the work you're doing on preventing early marriages? Over to you, Mr. Aguina.
The chair, humble before the Director General, the Executive Director of the organization, humble before the speakers who spoke before me. I'm so happy to be given the opportunity today to address the world on matter concerning impact of COVID-19 on poverty, that's the economic status of the Maasai community. Maasai community are a pastoral community in Kenya. They're marginalized. Literacy level is very high. They live mostly under a ecological zone that is very dry.
Mr. Aguina, I believe that we are being cut off because we don't hear you. There is a technical problem of connectivity. Can you hear me, Mr. Aguina? Scomperfell. I suggest, given this technical problem, we will keep Mr. Aguina on standby until the connectivity is restored. And I move over to the next speaker, the next panelist, Mrs. Casey Myers. Mrs. Myers is the founder and executive director of One Digital World, a non-profit organization which seeks to empower refugees and asylum seekers, notably by reducing inequality through digital education. Mrs. Casey Myers, in this light, I could perhaps suggest you two themes for your brief presentation. One is, or the first is, how is your organization working on providing equal access to education and resources so that vulnerable individuals that I just mentioned could have a better future for themselves? And the second is, could you elaborate on the importance of your work in view of the growing digital divide in the new normal in times of COVID and post-COVID? Over to you, Mrs. Myers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you for having this event. This is wonderful, and Human Rights Day really is just one of the very best days to celebrate. It's such an important day. So I first joined the field in 2016. My background is an educator, and at that time I decided I really believed in education, but the capacity that I was doing it just wasn't quite the right fit. I knew that I could be doing more, and I wasn't sure what it was. And so fortunately, I had the good fortune and the savings to be able to leave my job to go and travel. I love to travel, and I wanted to learn more about what is an international experience. I think it's really important to see our humanity before our own nationality. And so at that time, I sold and gave away everything that I couldn't fit into a backpack. I rented out my house and sold my car and all my possessions. And I backpacked around the world for a year. I've now traveled to over 52 countries through South America, Europe, Africa, Asia, Australia, New Zealand. It was absolutely amazing and transformative. And allowed me to learn during that time was when the crisis and the refugee crisis was really starting to hit a tipping point in Europe. And so I began to learn about that crisis and really found it interesting. When I finished my travels, I actually then traveled to Lesbos, Greece, which was the heartland, where we were seeing a mass exodus from parts of the Middle East and parts of Africa coming through the Greek islands in the Mediterranean to Europe. And just to kind of frame that, in the end of 2019, we surpassed even World War II with the number of displaced people, 79.5 million displaced people around the world. It's been a growing issue. And here in the United States, we've just announced an 833% increase of how many refugees that we will be accepting in the next year. And research shows us that 3/4 of refugees and asylum seekers often don't have the resources to even complete high school. When they're resettled, it can take 7 years for them to become self-sufficient and reliant in a new country and culture. So this breeds all kinds of issues that we've been talking about today, violence and hate crimes and xenophobia. So imagine these challenges of language and education, not being prepared for a new kind of labor market, having health issues, employment. And so One Digital World was founded in 2020, where we partner with refugee camps and shelters. Our concept is to use the time that you are going through the asylum process, which can take months to years, to be able to prepare you for the next steps. Often when leaving camps and shelters, people lose all support that they've had and actually aren't ready yet to be able to get a job or get their children into school. So we set up computer lab classrooms, provide internet access, and teach digital literacy, everything from how to turn a computer on, and as well as English, and providing other types of support. So you had mentioned COVID-19. Before COVID-19, over 90% of jobs required some kind of digital skills. Now that we've had COVID-19 and still do, everything is digital. Even to do construction, you need to have some kind of digital resources and know how to use computers and smartphones. So we wanted to make sure, how can we use this time wisely and be able to provide this type of integrated education and employment preparation. So at this time, we're currently working along the US-Mexico border, but as I mentioned previously, I've also worked in Europe. Our plan is to expand around the US, providing these kinds of services. My goal is that eventually I'll work myself out of a job and we won't need these kinds of things. But unfortunately, as long as we've got refugee camps, we plan to be there to provide the type of educational empowerment support to be able to benefit not only the refugees and asylum seekers and forcibly displaced persons, but also the communities that are accepting and welcoming these new people into their homes and neighborhoods. Thank you so much for this event and for this platform to be able to share our messages. I've been loving hearing what everyone is doing.
Thank you very much for that brief but very informative and with a personal note, this presentation about your backpacking and traveling, and also all that you learned. Thank you very much indeed. I now go to the next speaker on my list, Professor Samia Al-Amoudi. Professor Al-Amoudi is a global activist in the fight against women's breast cancer in Saudi Arabia. She was also the first woman from the Gulf Cooperation Council to win a seat at the Union for International Cancer Control Board in Geneva. Professor Samia Al-Amoudi, in this light, I would have perhaps the following topic to propose to you for your presentation, which is that in view of the COVID-19 awareness efforts and from your personal experience, could you tell us how the pandemic affected women, which are considered the most vulnerable, in the Gulf countries primarily, and what efforts were done to address and help them get their voices heard? Thank you, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I'm very happy to share in this meeting with this distinguished group of guests, and I'm happy as well to talk about health rights, particularly women's health rights in Saudi Arabia, because this is one of the area that I would like to shed light on, particularly with the COVID-19. First of all, Saudi women, now the women's empowerment in Saudi Arabia is escalating in every aspect, not only in health issues. And no doubt that the COVID-19 have impacted the life of everybody in the globe, every woman in the globe, whether from the health part, physically, economically, socially, and this is extremely important. In Saudi Arabia, maybe this has give us the chance to show how the gender reform receive the international recognition, because now there is a tremendous change in women empowerment in Saudi Arabia, and particularly during the COVID-19. For example, the Saudi Arabia GT presidency has made empowerment of women and youth as a focus of its 2020 agenda. Not only that, but another important leadership part when we were involved in the G20 Science 20 Task Force, which is for future of health. And we have done a tremendous work about the impact of the COVID-19 on women. Now, there is one thing which was important about what we have done in Saudi Arabia. First of all, the treatment and all the medical care was free of charge during this COVID-19 for all male and female, Saudi and non-Saudi, so without discrimination. Not only that, because we know that 35% of the healthcare sector employees are female, so there was rules, and there was exemption for pregnant women and breastfeeding women and women who have cancer, who were on cancer treatment. They were exempted and given paid leave, and when they come back to work as well, they do not have to work in the front line. They will have work where there is no direct contact with COVID or suspicious COVID. This is another thing. The other thing is empowerment with knowledge, because we know that even for us as healthcare providers, we lack knowledge about COVID-19 and the virus. In the beginning, we were all a little bit ignorant about it. So empowering the woman with knowledge was extremely important, and we paid attention as well to this appealed group of women, because these appealed are the focus of our interest, not interest, but because they do have right like others. And the other thing, the country in Saudi Arabia allocated high budget for elderly, for widows, for the divorced women, for the disappealed, so that they can support them during this crisis. Even the home care, health care, it was continuous even during the lockdown. So that was one of the issues that were important to us, to empower women and provide them with the health rights. Of course, we know that even the violence rate have increased everywhere in the world, and there was a focus on empowering women with knowledge and with a clear system, empowering them with how to approach the, how to call for help. There are hotlines, there are clear system for these women to empower them so that we protect them from all these aspects. Cancer patient as well, because we know during the crisis, there was cancellation of appointments, there was delay in management. There was a lot of effort from the Ministry of Health and all the sectors so that they empower the woman with all the information so that we do not have morbidity or mortality or effect or impact on these patients. The last thing, even our curricula, we have in the Faculty of Medicine, we have introduced the impact of COVID-19 on reproductive health rights so that to increase the awareness. This is the way we have dealt with the COVID-19. And of course, it is the priority for our government now to empower women, especially with the sustained development goals, goal number 5, to empower women and youth. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Sami Al-Moudi, for that very informative presentation of such huge developments that have taken place in Saudi Arabia, which you're not all the time aware of. So that was very, very useful. Thank you again. I have just been informed that Mr. Joseph Agina, who had begun from Kenya, then got cut off because of the connectivity problem, is back again. So over to you, Mr. Joseph Agina. The floor is yours. Can you hear us? Yes, we can hear you now. Yes.
Can't hear.
We can hear you. You have the floor. Yes, please. You are muted, Saikri. Can you hear us? Or else we have the video that you sent us, so perhaps we can project that video because we have this connectivity problem. I will ask the team to project the video. Team, could you please project the video right now? Thank you.
And if we look at the issue of early marriage, we have the idea of closure of schools in order to curb the spread of COVID-19 in schools, where we have
okay,
who are let loose in terms of interaction, physical education, board games, learning process in the classroom. So to decongest this was a matter of closing the schools for safety. But closing the schools and sending back these children into the community met now the traditional cultural practices. The traditional cultural practice of Maasai is that they have 1, child marriage, 2, child labor, 3, child pregnancy, 4, FGM, that is a female genital mutilation, 5, gender-based violence. It is there. For example, assault and prevailing factors that are there. So in child marriage simply meant it was not a window for them to be able to give out their girls because most of them are illiterate. The literacy is very high. They did not value so much the issue of education. And therefore the gap was used for child marriage. And we see cessation meant that even the government officers who monitor, who look into what's happening, they're also afraid. Everybody went and closed him or herself. And therefore the community took advantage In terms of child labor, yes, the boys were given time to go and do herding. And herding meant that these children are now in extreme danger. One, wild animals. Two, hunger, thirst. And they're still very young. They travel long distances with their herds. And child pregnancies whereby after FGM, the girls are let loose with the boys. And many will not go back to school. That's a fact. FGM means that once a child has been mutilated, genitally mutilated, now qualifies to become a mother. And many fell victims of this act. Our intervention, we decided to go immediately into community education and sensitization. We also use now this time round on strong women with strong advocacy voices, and we use them so we rounded them up very fast, and we passed the information that is need to close circuit and educate and control the extreme acts of child marriage, report via technology, so that we can be able to get in touch with the chiefs of provincial administration and curb that. And the various groups, through focused group discussions, putting all the protocols of COVID-19 in mind, we were able to use the small group of women to control and hold victims, they would be victims, into liberty. And we are proud to say, as WASEA, or Kajura Island Community Association, that became a very successful story. And therefore, our two facets are: one, we'll be able to bring about the village to village trade, that's in terms of poverty eradication. In terms of the early marriage, we're able to use the closed circuit method, whereby the leaders and talking points of the village women were able to address the issue of child marriage, child labor, FGM, and gender-based violence. And it became a successful story. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Agina. Unfortunately, because of the connectivity problem, you couldn't be live, but thank you very much for this video through which you gave us a very good insight into the problems and how to solve them, deep-rooted problems in the Maasai community. The last person on my list, in fact, remaining on the panel list, was Mrs. Eli Praderwand, who was second, but because of connectivity could not be connected. However, I will give the floor very quickly to our project and information officer, Mrs. Marina, who will just in 2 words briefly summarize the foundation that Mrs. Praderwand works for. Over to you, Marina.
Thank you very much, Dr. Palwankar. We're sorry that Ellie could not join us today, but it is my honor to briefly read her statement that she prepared for today's participation. I read selected fragments. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to your Human Rights Day commemoration and to bring in a few ideas about empowering rural women leaders and their communities to continue to claim their basic human rights for sustainable development around the world. The Women's World Summit Foundation, at its very beginning in 1991, focused on reaching out to include rural women and their communities in our annual empowerment campaigns and awards for their courageous and creative projects for the improvement of life in rural communities. It is still a privilege to learn about their life circumstances and especially how to empower them and to rise and claim their basic human right to development, which is also spelled out in the UN Declaration on the Right to Development. The Women's World Summit Foundation has a 17 days campaign of activism for rural women leaders and their communities. You can go on the Geneva Centre's Twitter. We will make sure to share more information on this wonderful campaign about which, unfortunately, we cannot speak in much detail right now. The impact of COVID-19 has exposed and exacerbated inequalities within and among countries. There is an urgent need for strengthened multilateralism and international cooperation by states and all actors in a spirit of global solidarity and shared responsibility. The collective responses of the international community in the short and long term must be guided by all human rights, including the right to development. And I'd like to also briefly highlight the annual prize for women's creativity in rural life, which was created by the World Women's Summit Foundation in 1994. And each year, this prize awards 10 selected candidates, 10 representatives of rural women communities with a donation for their creativity, courage, and especially compassion that they continuously demonstrate in improving the quality of life in rural communities. Again, unfortunately, we have no time to share information about this year's prize winners, but we will make sure to distribute this information on our social media and further with those interested. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marina. That brings us to the end of the panelists. I will now proceed with a very brief wrap-up of all the interesting things that were said. There were so many of them and time is running very short, so I will try and be very brief, and I will probably not do justice to the rich presentations. You will have to excuse me. I asked your apologies already, and I will go ahead right now. We saw that the media frames refugees and crisis in a very stereotyped way. As I said, they're helpless and vulnerable. They don't highlight the fact that even within these camps, you have women who recycle waste and can feed their children and educate them, which is extremely important. We saw how much progress was being made in the UAE and how the UAE could do internal as well as international solidarity and equality. Internally, because it was given free equipment and testing to all, it helped the recovery from grassroots level down to up at the socio-economic framework. And internationally, it sent equipment and other help to 120 countries affected in the midst of the pandemic. So this is an extremely great example of internal and international solidarity and equality. We also heard about the new forms of diplomacy, which are not limited to international actors, but you have even emails, fashion, food, and this also creates a lot of ambiguity because with relation to the role of business and peace, they don't pursue the same goals. Peace is very difficult to measure. It's a new field, and we need to evaluate what peace really is and its role in different contexts, because peace does not necessarily mean just absence of conflict. It is also the need to be able to disagree and dialogue peacefully. That is also peace. It's very important. So we have to develop new narratives in which the business sector can play a role in peace and in development, especially in peace, but it requires more clarification of the notion of peace. We also heard that the COVID-19 has amplified inequalities in all sectors and walks of life. Gender, especially in minorities, sexual minorities. What is important is to have good infrastructures for delivery of health, welfare, food, access to such rehabilitation centers. The policies have been adopted, but the problem is implementation. So the role of the state also has to be strengthened, and the responsibility of the non-state actors and civil society equally in a give and take way. We heard about the personal itineraries of one of the panelists who understood by her backpack traveling the grassroots problems faced at the grassroots level when challenges such as pandemics or other global challenges hit. And as was stated, we have today almost 80 million displaced people in the world, and it is extremely difficult. The big challenge is to reintegrate into society after the people come out of the refugee camps and centers. And therefore, they have to be given computer access because they have to have digital skills in order also to be job seekers, to have application to job. And without this, so education and employment reintegration through digital means has become extremely important. This is also what we've learned. We also learned a lot about the developments in Saudi Arabia, because the COVID has given a chance to show how gender reform has accelerated in Saudi Arabia in a very, very accelerated manner towards the 2030 agenda. Saudi Arabia was also in the task force on the future of health. It must be noted that just like the UAE, Saudi Arabia also is into equality and solidarity internally and externally. Internally, the medical care is given free of charge. It makes no difference, no gender difference, male and female, no nationality difference between Saudis or non-Saudis. So there's no discrimination. And also the elderly, the whole healthcare to the elderly and to the women's empowerment has been strengthened. And this also ought to be noted. Finally, we were also told about the problems in the Maasai community, which dealt with child marriages, child labor, child pregnancies, female genital mutilation, and gender-based violence. So it is extremely important for the state to step in, but also for the national and the civil society organizations to do their work more successfully, and that education be given the importance, the crucial importance it merits. I thank you for this, and without further ado, I will give the floor to our chairman and the chair of the panel for the concluding remarks and close the conference. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Mersh. Dear panelists and friends, we have now come to the conclusion of this meeting, which has been so rich, and I believe we have all learned a lot, and that from the insights gained in this panel, we will all contribute in our respective fields and ways to help recover even better, while reinforcing the protection and enjoyment of human rights in all regions of the world. The Geneva Centre is deeply appreciative of your commitment to the noble cause of upfitting the downtrodden and deprived, and of your initiative to alleviate their sufferings, free them, and restore their human dignity. In view of this appreciation, the Geneva Centre wishes to honor you with a humble token in the form of a certificate of merit, mentioning your field of work and thanking you for your participation in this panel. The certificates will be sent to you by email very shortly. With this, I wish you all success in your endeavors and a safe, healthy, and happy holidays and New Year. The meeting is closed. Thank you very much.